Hi friends, in this tutorial series, we'll be implementing Spring Boot 3 and gRPC examples. In this tutorial, we'll be looking at how to handle errors using Spring Boot and gRPC. For this, I'll be taking reference of my website javainews.com. So go to Spring Boot 3. In Spring Boot 3, go to Spring Boot 3 gRPC examples. The example that we'll be looking at today is Spring Boot gRPC error handling example. In this tutorial, we'll be looking at Spring Boot gRPC error handling hello world example. In the next tutorial, we'll be further modifying this example to implement error handling using gRPC metadata trailer. Also, in another tutorial, we'll be further modifying this example to implement global exception handler using gRPC advice. Error handling in gRPC client and server. It involves managing and reacting to errors that may occur during the communication between the gRPC client and server. In gRPC, there are different types of errors that can occur, such as network errors, server errors, security errors, and protocol errors. In gRPC, error handling is typically implemented using gRPC status codes and status messages. So when an error occurs, the server will send an appropriate status code and message to the client, which can then handle the error accordingly. So in the client, we'll be handling this error by checking the status code of the response and taking appropriate actions such as retrying the request, logging the error, or displaying an error message to the user. gRPC provides well-defined status codes as a part of the RPC API that can be made use of during error handling. So these are some of the gRPC error codes. So suppose at the server end we get an invalid argument, that is one of the input parameter, it is not as expected, then the gRPC status code returned will be 3. Also, if suppose some resource cannot be found, then the status code 5 will be sent by the gRPC server. So let us begin with the implementation part. We'll be modifying the code that we had developed in a previous tutorial, that is Spring Boot 3 gRPC unary example. So go to this example here. In this tutorial, we had implemented unary gRPC call between the client and the server. So the bank client, it needs the account balance for a particular account number. So it sends a get balance request to the bank server. The bank server processes this request and returns the balance for that particular account number back to the client. So we'll be modifying this example to implement error handling. Go below here and download the source code for the example that we had implemented here. The Spring Boot gRPC server and client examples that we just downloaded, they are Maven project. So import them in Eclipse as Maven project. Once you have imported it, we'll be building these projects. So go to run as Maven build. And here use the command eclipse clean install. Do the same for the client. So here the builds are successful. If you go to the source main proto folder, both in the client as well as the server, we have the same proto file. In the proto file, we first have the account request. So this is the request that will be sent by the client to the server. So it has the account number for which we want the account balance. We'll be sending this request from the client to the server. Once the server gets this request, it will be returning back the account balance response, which has the account number and the corresponding account balance. So at the gRPC server end, we'll be having a service named account balance service, which will have a method get account balance, which will take the account request and return back the account balance response. So in the gRPC server project, if we go to source main Java bank account balance service, this class we have exposed it as a gRPC service. Also in this class, we have a method named get account balance, which takes the account request as a parameter. Also in this class, we have a method named getAccountBalance, which takes the account request as an input parameter. Then using this account request, it creates an instance of the account balance response, which is returned back to the gRPC client. If we go to the gRPC client in source main Java, in the service package, we have a bank service. So here it makes use of the blocking stub to make a call to the getAccountBalance method of the gRPC server. To this request, it passes the account number. Then once this request has been made, then it gets a response back from the server. We are printing it here. So let us run this example. Let us first start the gRPC server, run as Java application. So here it has started on port 8090. Let us now start the client. When we start the client, it will send a request to the server. So here it has sent a request for the account number 5, and here it is getting back the response that the balance is 100. So in the gRPC server end, once we get the account request, the server, it is just building here a mock response and setting the balance as 100. But in the real world application, based on this account number, it would be making a call to some database from which it would get the account balance and then return it back to the user. Now suppose for this real world scenario, the database it is down. So the gRPC server, it will not be able to create this account balance response for this particular account number. So in this case, we'll be throwing back an exception with the status code not found back to the gRPC client. So let us simulate this scenario. So here at the server end, we'll be simulating a scenario where the database it is down for a particular account number, that is account 5. So we want to return a gRPC status code not found back to the client. So here we are checking if the request account number, it is account 5. Then in the response observer on error method, we are passing the status code not found, and along with this we are passing the description where we are saying that the requested account number, it cannot be found, and this we are passing as a runtime exception. So let us make this code change. Copy this. Go to the gRPC server and import this. So we are done with the code changes. So let us now start the gRPC server to test these. Here I'll be starting this in the debug mode. So debug as Java application. So here the gRPC server, it has started on port 8090. Now let us start the gRPC client. So in the gRPC client, we'll be passing the account number as account 5. So let us start the gRPC client. Debug as Java application. So here we are in the gRPC client. The stub will now make a call to the get account balance method of the gRPC server. Here we are now at the gRPC server end. Here we get the account number. Here in the account request, we have the account number as account 5. So this if condition is true, so it will go inside. So the response observer on error method, we are setting the status as not found with the description the requested account number cannot be found. And this will be returning it back to the client. So let us run this. So at the client end, we are not handling this exception. So at the client end, it does not reach this sentence here, where it is printing out the book response, because we are not handling this exception. So here we get the gRPC exception with the status code not found, and here this is the description that we are sending it back. So the status runtime exception thrown by the gRPC server, it needs to be properly handled at the gRPC client. So at the gRPC client end, we'll be making use of the try catch block. So in the catch block, we'll be catching the status runtime exception. From this exception, we get the gRPC status, which has the code and the description which we'll be printing. So let us make these changes. Go to the code. And here I'll be putting this in the try block. Copy this catch block. So we are done with the code changes. Let us now again test the gRPC client. So here the gRPC server is still running. Now let us run the gRPC client code. So here the request it is received in the gRPC server, and I'll just run this. So at the gRPC client end, we catch this exception in the catch block and we print the error code and the description. So the gRPC client, it is handling this exception properly now. Hope you have understood this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we'll be further modifying this example to implement gRPC error handling example using metadata and trailers. The source code for the examples that we just implemented, it can be downloaded from here. Thank you.